Hi, welcome to ArcGIS. I'm Nicholas, and I'm one of the GSIs for the course this year. And I just made this video as a tutorial to the basics of the program and to give you some references for watching someone interact with the program and talk through some of the things that we might normally tell you at the beginning of a lab. And so it's pretty short. I tried to keep it as compact as possible. It's just about a little over 20 minutes. And these early labs and the beginning of this class is really designed around exploration. And so we encourage you to try out different things and work with the symbology and the different settings as you learn them and explore just to get a sense for the program. The more you do that, the more comfortable you get with the different functions, the better off you'll be. We also really recommend you start a notebook, either paper or online. You could open a Google Doc or something and take notes on some of the good workflows and processes that are effective, and take those notes so that later on when you go, oh, how did I export that to PDF, or where is that thing, you can just look at your abbreviated notes and see where how you do that. Yeah, so I've indexed the video at the bottom. If you watch it on YouTube, in the description there'll be some links to specific parts where I talk about different things, so you can skip around if you're looking for something, and I'd highly recommend you watch it on 1.5 speed to get through it, because my talking is a little bit slow. But I hope it's helpful, and of course reach out to any of the GSIs if you have any questions. Alright, welcome to a video getting into the basics of ArcGIS Desktop. And before we jump into the labs and start working with Desktop, I thought I would make this video to introduce some of the basics of the software and get you familiar with how it looks. And so go ahead and open up ArcMap 10.8.1 underneath the ArcGIS folder. ArcMap is the software in the ArcGIS software suite that we're going to use the most, primarily for almost all the labs. Alright, when it opens up, you'll see this Getting Started window where there should be a template for a blank map. That's the default option. Later on, if you want to reopen a previous map that you had open recently, you can go up to Recent Maps, and you can see I've been working on the first couple labs here. But we can start by opening up a blank map. We can just double click on blank map. Alright, when you open up a new blank map in ArcMap, this is the window you'll be faced with. It should look something like this. Now this window is highly customizable, and quickly you'll get the hang of moving things around and opening different panes. And so if it doesn't look exactly like this, that's okay. We'll start off by looking at how we can customize our window to look the way we want. But the basic elements that you will see are a table of contents on the left. This is where we will see all the different data layers stacked up as we add them to our map. Those data pieces will be shown here in the center in the actual map. This is called a data frame, and it contains all those pieces of data, and we can visualize it. On the right here, right now I have the catalog, but there will be a number of tabs listed out depending on what panes you have open that are basically different tools within the program to access different parts of the program. Up at the top here we've got our toolbars, and the two main ones that you usually always have open are these two. And so these you'll become real familiar with, all these symbols. ArcGIS isn't really big on descriptions of what each tool does, but if you hover over a button, you'll get a little description of what it is. So if you forget what the binoculars is, you can hover and see, oh, it's the find tool. Okay. I'd also, of course, recommend, if you don't know what finding a geographic feature, place, or address means, then check out the internet. You can Google a lot of these things, ArcGIS find tool, and you'll find some documentation. You can, of course, also look in our textbook, which is really nicely laid out by Shalito, Discovering GIS and ArcGIS. Check out the textbook if you're confused about something, and read up, and it should make it clearer. To start with arranging these things, the toolbars at the top, you can click these 4 dots and drag them off and actually make them standalone. You can also drag them back in and dock them at the top or the side. Let's see if I can dock it on the side. There it is. So you can arrange your toolbars wherever you want. Personally, I like my toolbars like this. Now, the catalog is a really important pane that we often have open in ArcMap, and I'll explain why. It has to do with how ArcGIS handles files. It handles them a little bit differently than you might be used to in other more user-friendly programs that you've used. So a lot of GIS data files in the Esri ArcMap environment are made out of proprietary file formats. And those file formats are based on old database formats that mean they need to be viewed through the catalog, through ArcGIS catalog, this tool. It actually is its own standalone tool as well. If you go back to that programs folder, ArcGIS, Arc catalog, you can open up, and it basically will just be a windowed standalone version of this pane, this catalog pane. Here it is. And you can do file manipulation and move things around and create data files and things in here without the visualization aspect that you get in ArcMap. So to show you an example of how this is different, if we take catalog and we want to access, say, our downloads folder or our home folder where we're storing our files that we want to add to our map, we have to make a folder connection. It's not immediately available to access all of your files. And so to do that, you hit this plus button, add a folder connection button, and you select it here. So I'm going to add my desktop and hit OK. And I already had added it, but here it is now. My desktop is now a folder connection that I can open up, and any files that I have there will be available. Here's my D drive that I've added, and I've got our class files here. And if you look at Lab 1 data, and we expand it all the way open, I can see that in that folder for Lab 1, I've downloaded the data, and there's 7 pieces of data. And they're named, and the little symbol here shows you what kind of data it is. We'll get into that later. But the unusual thing is, if we try to look at these data files in just Windows Explorer, if we go and open up a folder, so here's that Lab 1 data, open it up, oops. Here they are, and you can see they don't look as nice. Each data file here is actually composed of a number of files that share the same name but a different extension, and together they form the file. So the important thing is you can't move these files around in Windows Explorer here. If you try to do that, you might corrupt them, or you might damage the files. So generally it's encouraged that you don't try to manipulate data files in Windows Explorer. You always work through the catalog. And if something looks funny, a file type that you've downloaded from the internet looks funny in Windows Explorer, try taking a look at it in catalog, and it might clean it up into one of these nice data files. So that's the first note about how ArcGIS handles files a little bit differently than most programs.
And a quick note on these different file types. So data are usually going to be provided to you as shapefiles, and they end with an extension of .shp. And these are individual data pieces that you can combine into, in a map document. A map document is denoted with MXD. So this lab1.mxd is a map document. And a key thing is that the map document, the MXD file, does not contain the data that you're looking at when you put data into that. It's simply referencing these external data files. So if you copied just your map document to a different computer and tried to open it up, it would say, I can't show you anything that you had put into here because I don't know where any of the data are. So it's important to put your map document with your data. And if you want to move it between computers, make sure you take the entire folder containing all of your data and the map document and move that. The nice thing about that also is that it means that you can keep one copy of each of your data and have a number of map documents that visualize them in different ways. So we have this set of data for Lab 1 that has country and road and city data, and maybe we want to create different combinations of them and save those map documents. By making multiple map documents that reference those different combinations, we won't be duplicating our data and creating a lot of extra storage that we need to have. So that's a benefit of this separation of these two types of files.
The next thing I'll mention is that like many powerful programs that work with a variety of data, occasional crashes are something you just have to deal with in ArcMap. And so it's really important to save your work a lot. And so up in the top left corner here, you can see it says untitled. That means that I'm working in an unsaved map file. And so the first step when you open up a brand new map should always be to save that file. And so I'm going to save this to my Lab 1 folder. It's also important to keep an organized folder system. And I'll call this Lab 1 tutorial. Okay, so now it says Lab 1 tutorial, and I know I'm working in a saved environment. And every so often it's good to Control S to save your document. That way if a geoprocessing step fails or it crashes, you won't lose too much work. Now there are a couple other things that we often do first thing when we open a new map document, and that is to modify the document properties. So up in File, Map Document Properties, in Map Document Properties there are a number of things that you can edit, but an important one is at the bottom here where it says path names, store relative path names to data sources. This can be important to check because if you select it, it means that if you move your map file to a different computer where it might be on a different drive letter, it'll still be able to access its data files because it's storing a relative file path name instead of a direct one. And so often that will save you some hassle with having to reestablish the path names for data when you've moved your map file to a different computer or opened it on a new drive. Now what goes along also with the occasional crashes that happen in ArcGIS is that we might find there's a geoprocessing step that we're trying to do, and it keeps crashing over and over again, and we can't get past it. And often we can solve that problem by going to geoprocessing options and enabling or disabling background processing. Generally, not having background processing enabled, unchecking this box, will result in a smoother experience and fewer crashes in ArcGIS. The other thing we want to mention is that while some of you might be running ArcMap on a lab computer or at a home computer, a Windows machine running native Windows, you might also be running it on a Mac through AppStream, Amazon AppStream, which is one way we've allowed access to the program. And an important function in ArcGIS is right-clicking. And so all the time I might right-click on layers here to access a bunch of settings to modify it. And on a Mac, it can be tricky to set up your right-click, and so it's worth checking your settings on your Mac, your preferences, to see how you have right-click set up and make sure that that right-click is working so that when you're in ArcGIS, you can right-click things and access files, access settings. Okay, so now that we've gone over a couple of the basic things, let's try adding a little bit of data. So there are two ways to add data in ArcMap. One is through the catalog. We can drag and drop data files straight from the catalog window. And the other way is this plus button, which if you hover says add data quite descriptively. If you hit the little down arrow next to add data, you can see that it's add data, and then also you can add base maps, which we'll get into in Lab 2. These are online streaming base maps that might provide, for example, imagery, like Google Earth style imagery. But you can click add data, and that just pulls up a little miniature catalog window where you can go to your folder connections, find your folder, go into your data, and select the data you want to add. I find it's easier just to find it in the catalog and then click and drag. So we can bring in countries.shape, and voila, we have the countries of the world. just colored by some random default colorization. And if you zoom in and pause, you can see that the data is actually quite detailed. And sometimes the way it draws initially in ArcMap looks kind of pixelated or low quality, but when you export it as a PDF at the end in your final map, it'll use the sharpest, highest quality render, and it'll look a lot better. So this is just sort of the quick interface for us to assemble everything we want. Some of the really basic functions that we're going to be using in Lab 1 include changing the look, the symbology of a layer. And so here's our countries layer, and currently it is a yellow fill with this grayish outline. And if we want it to look different, what we can do is right click on countries and go to properties. And in properties for this layer, there's a bunch of tabs. Symbology is the one we want. You click on Symbology, and there are a number of options for how we can symbolize our countries. We can use a single symbol, in which case it's just going to be this yellow and gray, or we could change it to maybe green with a blue outline and make it a thicker outline with these basic settings. Hit OK and hit Apply, and we see that our map updates with those settings. We can also categorically symbolize our layer by hitting Categories. And what we're going to do here is pick a value. So this is an attribute or a property that this map data has for each country. And they're not, usually these are sort of abbreviated labels that might be a little bit hard to parse, but some of them we might be able to guess, like, okay, this one's easy, name. We know that this should be the name of every single country. If you hit add all values, it'll find all of the country names that is in that data and add them all, and it'll assign them random colors based on this sort of set of random colors. We could change it to be all greenish colors. Maybe we like that a little bit better. So now it's kind of shades of grayish green. Hitting apply, there we go. Now we've got each country where every different country has a different color. If we instead pick something like continent, we add all values, we can see that there are fewer values. And hitting apply, we see that we're now coloring it only by which continent each country's in. So these are categories, right? You know, being in Africa, being in Asia, a country's name. We might want to color a country by a quantity, so something with a numerical value. So on the left here, we can go to quantity. We can pick population. So let's take a look at that. Population estimated. And it starts filling in some default values. We'll say we're going to divide it up into 7 bins. And I'm going to pick a color ramp. This is a smooth color ramp now, not discrete colors, because we're symbolizing continuous numerical data. And I'll pick this sort of white to red. Okay, apply. And now we have symbolized the world's countries by their population. And yeah, so in the early labs, this interface is where you're going to be changing the symbology. I'm going to go back to a single symbol, and often in this list here, you can find just some quick, generic, easy to use color combinations that look nice. Here, I'll just make everything green, hit apply. So now that we've got some green countries, let's add one more piece of data. We'll say world cities.shape, and we get a bunch of dots for cities. An important thing is that in this table of contents, you can sort your table of contents by different aspects, and we'll get into some of these later on. But for now, the listing by drawing order is useful because what it means is you can drag layers above each other to specify an order in which they're drawn. And so if world cities is below countries, you see that countries actually covers up the cities and we can't see them. So sometimes it's important to check if you're not seeing a layer pop in, it's because it's being covered by another layer, and you can modify that with the draw order by dragging here. Let's change world cities' symbol. I am going to shortcut to changing the symbology by just double clicking or clicking on the symbol right here, and it just takes me to that symbol selector, and I can pick stars, for example. I'm going to pick this star. I'm going to make the color pink and make them a little bit bigger. Okay. Voila. Okay. I've got my world map with some cities on it, symbolized as stars. And now I want to export my map and make it beautiful so I can turn it in or deliver it to my client or boss. In ArcMap, the two main views for this central pane here is data view, which is what we've been looking at, and then layout view. If we click layout view, suddenly we have a piece of paper in front of us. The default here is an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, and we see our data that we just symbolized and organized laid onto there inside of a data frame. And so a data frame is, if I move this over, a data frame is this box here. And so by using the select elements cursor, I can select the data frame and resize it. And so I can make it wider, smaller. You can make it larger than the piece of paper, which is generally not a good idea. So I'm going to keep it to the size of the sheet of paper. Because the world is landscape, one thing I'm going to do is go up to File, Page, and a Print Setup, make my paper orientation landscape. Hit OK. So now my paper is landscape, which is a little bit more natural for the data I'm showing, this sort of world map. Now, once I've got my data frame aligned, it's only sort of approximate here as I drag these handles. So instead what I can do is, here is the data frame in my table of contents. I can right click on it and go to Properties. And it also has a number of tabs, one of which is Size and Position. So here I can set the size and position of the data frame precisely. And so using the bottom left corner of my data frame as an anchor, I'll set it at 1 inch, 1 inch, XY, and make it 9.5 by, let's see, 11. We'll make it 9 by 6.5. Okay, so now we've got it the correct size, so it has 1 inch margins all around. And I can hit the pan tool, this hand, and that means I can interact with my data without moving the data frame. And if I hit the zoom tool, we can zoom in a little bit and make sure the data fills the frame. All right, that looks pretty good. The final thing that's always really important is making sure that we add all of the key elements that every map should have before we give it to our boss or turn it in for the class. And there's a great walkthrough of those elements that you should always have on the front page of our Canvas website and also linked on many of the labs. So check that out. But for now, I'm going to add, a north arrow. Very important. We'll use a fancy north arrow. Make it a little bigger. Yeah. And I will insert a scale bar. Make it a little bigger. Oh, those are awkward divisions. So you can resize your scale bar. That's nice. Or we'll just leave it at the default, 10,000 miles long. And we also will add some text. And I'll make this my name, the year, and a title. Map of the world with cities. Great, so we've added our elements that we want. You might want to add some more, including a legend. That's really key. But if you're ready to export your map, go ahead and save. Always important to save things. And then export map is the tool. From there, you can export it as a PDF. So I'm going to name it lab1 tutorial map1.pdf. We'll save it to the lab1 folder here. And you can change some settings here. If it's not high enough resolution, you could bump this up. Usually 300 should be plenty. And hit save. And it exports that. And a really good habit to get into is to check your maps when you've exported them to see that they exported correctly and look okay. So if we open up that tutorial map I just exported, it looks great. And you can also see that what I said before about it looking a little bit better when you export it to PDF is definitely true. You can see the coastlines look a lot less pixelated and everything looks nice and sharp. The north arrow is gorgeous. And now that we're happy with how it looks, we can upload that to the Canvas website and turn it in for a grade.